So when I was asked to talk, I thought, what better topic to talk about than pollination, for many reasons. Among other things, pollinators have been in the news a lot, and it's not good news. And it hasn't been for some time. In fact, in 2006, the National Research Council, which is the research arm of the National Academy of Sciences, released a report on the status of pollinators in North America, and I actually chaired that report. This was the result of about 18 months of study using all kinds of available information in the published literature and talking to various and sundry stakeholders. So we were charged with trying to figure out if, in fact, pollinators are in decline, and if they're in decline, what are the consequences, and what can we do to stem or reverse that decline? So we issued our report and a number of recommendations. Among the conclusions, the sort of primary conclusion was the available data indicated clearly that America's honeybees were trending demonstrably downward. And there is a long-term database that's available from the National Agricultural Statistics Service that they've been basically censusing honeybee colonies since 1947. The other conclusion is we just did not have available data for most other pollinators. There were hints at declines for bats, birds, butterflies, and other pollinators, including other bee species. But there was an appalling lack of baseline data, and without baseline data, you can't detect a decline. So one of the recommendations, in fact, a whole suite of recommendations, revolved around addressing the issue, what can we do? Outreach was recommended. America would never adopt pollinator-friendly practices unless there was a general appreciation of pollinators, and there should be an effort to raise awareness in the broader community through citizen science monitoring programs, teacher education, and K-12. So the recommendations were encouragement to engage the public in citizen science monitoring programs, teacher education, and K-12. This is how we don't have enough entomologists in the country, in the world, to gather the data we need on at least even pollinating insects. We need to engage the public. We need to to get as many people involved as possible, and that was one of the recommendations of that report. And in response, several things happened. As chair of that committee, I took these recommendations very seriously. So we founded the science center called the University of Illinois Pollinatarium, and I think one of the most brilliant examples of creative repurposing, we took a building that had once been a pesticide storage shed and turned it into a science center for raising awareness about pollinators. First freestanding science discovery center in the country, to our knowledge, devoted to pollinators and the ecosystem services they provide. So if you haven't been there, this is what it looks like. It's at the south end of the Arboretum. There's a map here you can access either through Lincoln Avenue, through F&S jungle of buildings and property, or through Windsor Road. And the Pollinatarium, which was officially opened in 2009, has interactive exhibits about all the major groups of pollinators, not just bees, not just insects, and it emphasizes hands-on inquiry-based learning. And you can see various and sundry examples of activities. There might be a picture of Michael coming up, I'm not sure. Oh, yeah. Isn't that you right there? Yeah. So there are all kinds of programs at the Pollinatarium. We have Sunday lecture series called Pollination Fascination. We have weekend activities. In fact, it's open every weekend, 1 to 4. We have docents that staff the place. And all kinds of educational shows, activities, hands-on crafts, and we average between 2,500 and 2,000 and 3,000 visitors on an annual basis. And I mentioned this is no budget for this in the university, so it operates basically on goodwill and altruism, which is not an inappropriate mechanism given that Apis mellifera, the honeybee, is sort of the epitome of altruistic behavior in its eusocial habits. So there are also pollinator walks through the adjacent prairie, which is a reconstructed prairie that had been managed for many years by the Natural History Survey. We have demonstration gardens. This is Leslie Deeb, who is Pollinatarium manager, and she has done all kinds of creative partnering with master gardeners, master naturalists, with visiting kids. She built, for example, a salsa garden for kids who'd never gardened before. So all the different plants that go into salsa, she put in one garden. We have native examples of native plant gardens, so you can see what kinds of flowers attract what kinds of pollinators. There are photography workshops, all kinds of activities. The Dukes of Uke, by the way, which is a local band, liked the Pollinatarium so much. They played for we had an event that featured pollinators and the arts, and they liked the Pollinatarium so much they used the building as their album cover or their CD cover. Now, relevant to this group, since 2010, we have partnered with Champaign Unit 4 schools to create a unit for teaching second graders about pollinators. And this has been a very successful collaboration. Every single second grade class in the Unit 4 system comes to the Pollinatarium once every fall as part of their unit and gets involved in hands-on activities. And that's about 900 students. Leslie can't manage this alone. We have all kinds of graduate student volunteers. And in fact, our students are quite eager to be involved in this activity, among other things. It gives them outreach experience to put on their resume. And we find they bring skills as well. We have bee handlers. Not all graduate students know how to handle honeybees. We also have some bilingual students who've been very helpful because there are a number of, parents often come. And some of the students as well are sort of native Spanish speakers, and that's worked out spectacularly well. Okay, so what do they do during this? Was that a question?
I was about to ask what you're about to tell us.
Oh, okay. So what do they do during their visit? Well, we have 4 major goals. One is to recognize a bee, and by the way, we do have an active beehive. An observation hive, it's called, which is a sort of miniature colony. Colonies are usually 30 to 50,000. We have a few thousand between 2 large panes of glass, so you can actually see the bees. There's a tube that connects to the outdoors, so you can see them coming in with their pollen loads. You can see the bee dancing, the language that bees use to direct their nest mates to floral resources. The queen is marked with a little red enamel dot. Not in nature, we do that. And you can see the symbolic language of the bees directing their nest mates to all kinds. That's very popular. We call it the flight deck, is where the bees are. Recognize a bee, then distinguish between honeybees and bumblebees, 2 different genera, and then understand the significance of pollination and help the students develop or start thinking about how to help the bees, how to develop a bee-friendly garden, what to do to promote conservation, though not necessarily with those words. So, in the course of a matter of doing this, it has become apparent to me that this is a great way to engage kids in K-4. Pollination, just a great entree into all kinds of science. And why is that? It appeals to all 5 senses. Flowers are designed by evolution to attract attention. Most flowers, insect pollinated, animal pollinated plants. Ragweed you don't notice because it's wind pollinated. There's no need for it to signal its presence to any other organism. But animal pollinated plants depend on catching the attention of animal partners. So they look pretty. They smell mostly nice. And you can see them, smell them, feel them, touch them. And the bees you can hear because they buzz. It's tangible and accessible. Early on when we first had bee spotters, a Thomas Paine fourth grader explained why he was so enthusiastic about this project. Because he knew about global climate change. What can a 9-year-old do about global climate change? Well, a 9-year-old can do something. It's tangible. The bees are in trouble. You know what bees are. You don't need to learn about climate forcing models, or you don't need differential equations. You can see a bee and you can understand what being hungry is or not finding enough food. So it's very accessible, very tangible. Everybody knows what flowers are. And it happens to encompass many of the next generation science standards. Finally, it is something that kids can do something about. So it's an environmental issue that they have the tools to help with. And there are not many such environmental issues that are so available, accessible to kids. Okay, so among the next generation science standards for this age group, pollination hits a number of them. One of the disciplinary core ideas within biology, plants depend on animals for pollination or to move their seeds around. Well, that doesn't need any more explanation than that. Another core idea is biodiversity in humans. There are many different kinds of living things in any area, and they exist in different places on land and in water. Insects and flowers, you can't get better exemplars of this idea. There are about 1 million species of insects and about 300,000 species of flowering plants. And wherever you go, unless you are, well, even in Antarctica, there are insects. So the bottom of the deep sea, you won't find them. But then you don't find too many fourth graders down there either. Science and engineering practices. Plan and conduct an investigation collaboratively to produce data to serve as the basis for evidence to answer a question. Again, this is accessible. If you can find flowers, you can find pollinators, you can make your own observations, and you can collect your own data. So make observations firsthand or from media, collect data to make comparisons, to test hypotheses, all available. Then connections to the nature of science. Scientists look for patterns in order when making observations about the world. Again, systematics, taxonomy, identification this all depends on patterns. And they, in the case of bees in particular, or butterflies, these are visible patterns. The same thing with plants. Remember, flowers are designed to be seen. So we humans have great color vision and are very visually oriented, and we can detect these differences. You don't need a GC mass spec. You don't need fancy instrumentation to see these patterns in many cases. So cross-cutting concept, structure and function. The shape and stability of structures of natural and designed objects are related to their functions. And again, that's what evolution is all about. So bees, other pollinators, and plants co-evolve, and in the process of influencing each other's evolution, you can see the outcome of that long-standing evolutionary relationship in their morphology and in their appearance. So it's a great vehicle for illustrating these next generation science standards. Okay. All right. Why is it difficult to teach K3 or K4 pollination? Okay. Live animals, as anyone in the Midwest knows, insects in particular, are not available year-round. Maybe in Florida, but here in central Illinois, even entomologists have a hard time finding insects. There are winter stoneflies, but they're not pollinators. So. And some live pollinators present health risks. So there are major liability issues whenever you bring a group of kids in contact with 30,000 potentially easy to anger or disturb insects equipped with venomous stingers. So that's an issue, and it's not trivial because there are kids who are hypersensitive and who could easily, one bee sting could be enough to send them into the hospital. So there are major health risk concerns. Not all schools are located near abundant and diverse flower communities. So if you have a school in the middle of the inner city, there will be flowers, but the diversity is likely to be quite low, and it may not even be safe for them to be out and about examining flowers. And flowers and the insects that pollinate them overwhelmingly tend to be small and delicate. So little fingers may have some problems, and some of the key features, especially for seeing those patterns that allow you to identify things, may require magnification, and that requires instrumentation. So there are limits on how accessible pollination is as a topic. All right. So at the Pollinatarium, we try to address some of these problems. We have interactive exhibits that we combine with actual specimens, including insect specimens that are prepared so that children can handle them without fear of damaging the specimens. So these are bumblebees and honeybees that are 100 years old at least. And they are part of our departmental teaching collection back in, well, maybe not 100 years, in the 20s. This method of sealing specimens in glass tubes was used for the express purpose of reducing or minimizing loss due to damage during handling. And it works because we still have these. And through the glass, you can see all the features you need. You can get up close and personal with these things without risking damage them. The specimens on pins, this is the traditional means of preserving insects. They're dried and pinned. And in fact, I teach a class called Insects and People. It's for non-scientists. There's an optional lab, and the first lab is basically teaching people how to handle pin specimens. We have the pinky pass, where you touch pinkies, hold up the head of the pin, and just, hand them like this, so that no legs or antennae or wings fall off. Once they fall off, you have a hard time counting tarsal segments to identify things to species. So we have a variety of real specimens, but there are ways to prepare them so that they present no risk to the kids, and they present no risk and the kids present no risk to the specimen. So we have at University of Illinois. The Illinois Natural History Survey actually is the 7th largest insect collection in the country. Even our teaching collection, which is very modest, still has thousands of specimens. In fact, there was once a FOIA, I'm going off script here a lot. There was a FOIA request from an undergraduate who was concerned about use of animals in teaching of biology, and she asked for all biology instructors to tally up the number of specimens, living or dead, used to teach biology courses. When we looked like genocidal maniacs, because we've used hundreds of pin specimens. They're all 80 to 100 years old. And of course, the FOIA request probably didn't have six-legged things in mind. But still, we do, for teaching, have large numbers of specimens. And nothing is better than the real thing, again. You can look all you want online at images, but seeing the real thing, and there's some spectacular images, but just seeing the size relative to your size is a lesson in and of itself, because that's not always possible on the internet. So. All right, so displays explain not just the pollinators, but the plants and the process. So you can go from the plant perspective, the pollinator perspective, the economic perspective. There are all displays, attractive, colorful, on these green backgrounds. They're actually hollow core doors from Lowe's. It's all very painted green. And they hang from sort of a, what's it called, molding on the wall, so we can interchange them, make them age appropriate. All right, they're eye-catching and interactive. There are panels you can lift up for answers. Like here's one right here. See what this flower looks like under ultraviolet light. So, so there are all kinds of things for kids to do, and there's a game you can play that's there. And panels acquaint visitors with how plants communicate with pollinators, so the language of pollination, how again, after long evolutionary association, there are sort of channels of communication between the pollinator and the plants that they visit, and we can eavesdrop on those avenues, those channels of communication. So, just to illustrate how you can go about teaching someone, a fourth grader, what's a bee and what's not a bee. I'll imagine you're all fourth graders here, okay? So, you can, again, using pictures, you can use specimens. How do you know what's a bee or what's not a bee? Okay, well, you need a parts list. And you need to know some basic anatomy and in order to evaluate whether a particular insect is a bee or not a bee. There are, by the way, about 20,000 bees in the world, bee species in the world, not just honeybees and bumblebees. We here in the United States have about 4,000 species. But they do all share certain characteristics. That's why they're called bees. The way insect taxonomy or systematics works is that organisms are put in categories dependent on the number of shared traits. So what do you need to know? Basic parts list here. And they're all, you don't need to know technical names. I would call this a corbicula. You could call it a pollen basket. Antennae are antennae. There's proboscis, but you can say mouth parts or tongue and wings. So how do they all get put together to make a bee? Okay, the basic morphological attributes of a bee are long, wiry antennae. Sometimes they have an elbow bend. You know what ants look like. Ants always have an elbow. Many bees have an elbow, not all. 2 pairs of wings. Not one set of 2 wings, but 4 wings. 2 4 wings. 4 wings. 2 4 wings. And 2 hind wings. All right. All right. Fuzzy body. Bees have branched hairs. That unifies all the bees. Important functional trait. A mandible, chewing mouth parts, and a long tongue, but not too long. A long tongue. And that is for chewing pollen and sucking nectar. And an enlarged flattened segment on the hind legs, usually on the hind legs, and that's for carrying pollen. Okay, so the long, wiry, sometimes elbowed antennae are important for detecting floral odors. 2 pair of membranous wings, of course, are important for flying. The fuzzy body hair attracts and holds on to pollen grains. In fact, they're electrostatically charged, so that the pollen grains really, when the bee gets close enough, jump onto the bee. The famous bee biologist, Jerry Bromenschenk, who basically calls bees flying dust mops. Anyone see the last episode of CSI that was on Sunday? Gil Grissom, who should turn in his PhD in entomology that he got ostensibly from UCLA, used bees that had been trained to come to feeders, color-coded feeders, to sample the atmosphere in different locations in the mountains to see which ones had human scent. Yes, they're flying dust mops, but they are not flying GC-mass spectrometers. So, but they can and do pick up all kinds of pollutants. Actually, that's what Jerry Bromenschenk uses them for, is to find out where explosives might be, because they will come back after doing their foraging. You can detect residues of explosives and other environmental pollutants. The other parts, the long tongue for sucking nectar, mandibles for chewing pollen. Legs are variously modified for carrying pollen in a pollen basket. And here you see the pollen right there. And here you see the flattened part where the pollen is carried. And different bees have different styles of pollen baskets, but they all share certain, there's usually a flattened area where masses of pollen can accumulate. They, of course, gather masses of pollen to feed their babies. Okay, so here is a lesson that is from one of the many websites that helps provide resources for K-12. They're efficient pollinators, honeybees in particular, they're world's premier managed pollinators. They're covered with fine hairs that trap pollen. Their body shape and long proboscis allows them to reach deep into flowers. They require lots of nectar and pollen to rear their 30 to 50,000 young, so they visit lots of flowers, and they tend to have what's called flower fidelity. They'll repeatedly visit the same species. So the whole point of pollination is to carry the male gametes, the pollen, from one member of a species to the receptive female surface of a conspecific, a member of the same species, because if the pollen lands on a different species, no fertilization takes place. Okay. So here you go. Pretend you're fourth graders. Okay, here's an interactive game that can play with actual specimens or with photos. We're doing it with photos. A bee or not a bee? We got yes? It is, in fact, a carpenter bee. It has long, wiry antennae, 2 pairs of wings, fuzzy body, hard to see mandible and long tongue, and see that flattened segment right there. Not a bumblebee, it is a carpenter bee, different family. A bee or not a bee? Not a bee, right. So it is called a bumblebee hawk moth. It is a mimic of a bee. It is a moth that is entirely harmless and defenseless, except for the fact that if you don't look closely, it looks like a bumblebee, and most predators, including avian predators, leave anything that's striped yellow and flying around fast alone. So wrong kind, right? So these are knobbed antennae. They are not long and wiry. The tongue's way too long. Does not look like a bee tongue at all. And they have little skinny legs with no flattened area for carrying pollen. And they're also not hairy. They're covered really with scales. A bee or not a bee? Not so easy, is it? Not a bee. Not a bee. It is not a bee. But like the bumblebee hawk moth that wants you to think it's a bee, it is called a dronefly or a hoverfly. Really short, stubby antennae. There are no flattened areas for carrying pollen. It is a very important pollinator, it's just not a bee. And then no thoracic body hair. Michael will attest, I think, to the fact that many people are fooled by these droneflies or hoverflies. One of the very first pictures that was posted to Bee Spotter was of a syrphid fly. So, bee or not a bee? Flat? No? Fuzz? No? A little bit of fuzz, but it's not covered with fuzz. It is not a bee. It's a wasp. A yellow jacket. No fuzz, no flattened area for carrying pollen. Also, they can be important pollinators. They are, however, for the most part, carnivorous, so they will catch and kill caterpillars and feed their larvae with caterpillars. But they do visit flowers, and there are some wasps called pollen wasps that basically are like bees in that they eat nothing but pollen and nectar. A bee or not a bee? Yeah, not a great picture, yeah. Fuzzy. It is fuzzy. What's this yellow stuff? Yep, that is a pollen basket. It's not in the same place because this is not a member of the family Apidae, the family to which honeybees and bumblebees belong. But it is definitely a bee. It's a solitary bee, which a lot of people don't recognize. So you've got the characteristic elbowed antennae and the fur and the 4 wings and the like. A lot of people don't realize there are so many species of bees that are not honeybees or bumblebees. Bee or not a bee? No. Anybody know what it is?
2 of them, okay.
Yeah, they're in copulo. Sorry, hope everybody's over 18 here. Which is how you often find them on flowers. These are painted locust borer, is a so-called a longhorn cerambycid beetle. And it is yellow and black because it wants you to think it is a dangerous wasp, and it's a harmless beetle. And that's how it can afford to hang out on flowers in broad daylight, in flagrante, and not worry about being consumed by a bird because it looks like a chemically protected bumblebee. Okay. A bee or not a bee? Everybody's shy, you know, once bitten, twice shy. That is the bee. That is a honeybee. Absolutely classic. All the bees. There's its nice broad corbicula, right? Okay. One last one, I think. Bee or not a bee? Yeah, it is a bumblebee. I forgot to mention, you mentioned the wings. Yeah, it's a brown-belted bumblebee, which we have in our bee spotter collection. Okay, I just will go back here just for a second, even though I'm running out of time. Many of the syrphids are superb mimics of bees, and there's a local species. You see these forelegs here are kind of darker. You see how stubby the antennae are? This group of flies, they're called Brachycera. They have short, brachy means short, cera means horn, short antennae. Well, a big difference, all bees have long antennae. These have short antennae. There is a species of syrphid fly that has forelegs that are black, and when it rests like this. And it has 2 wings, but there is a darkened area on the wings that makes it look like there are 2 wings folded and pressed together. Really astonishing. Sorry. Off script again. All right, so that's the first thing they learn. What's a bee? Then what's the difference between a honeybee and a bumblebee? And again, there are there are patterns that you can show, and then that will, they can master, and they themselves can then use essentially a dichotomous key to determine what's a bee and what's a bumblebee. Overall, bees tend to be sort of skinny, bumblebees tend to be kind of robust. The honeybees are typically regularly striped. Bumblebees tend to have color blocks, sort of broader color blocks, and not these consistent stripes. And then if you find a nest, bumblebees can vary enormously in size. Honeybee workers all tend to be pretty much the same size. And those are the ones you see outside. You don't, unless you venture into a cavity to see the nest, you won't see the queen or the drones. So here you see there is a size difference, but most of the foragers, the workers, look pretty much the same. Bumblebee can have small workers, large workers, all kinds of variation. So again, general patterns, all consistent with next generation standards. Beyond honeybees and bumblebees, there are many other kinds of bees, even here in central Illinois. There are sweat bees, there are leafcutter bees, digger bees, cuckoo bees, all kinds, mining bees, mason bees, each with its own unique set of ecological requirements and set of distinctive morphologies, although many of them are hard to distinguish unless you dissect genitalia, and that's not something you want K-12 kids doing. So, or most people aren't keen to do that anyway, and you have to kill the insect to inspect the genitalia, and that's kind of counter to a conservation message. So beyond bees, there are insects in at least 6 other orders involved in pollination. We talked about the bees and wasps, we talked about the flies, we talked about a little bit about moths and butterflies and beetles. There are true bugs and there are thrips. So there's altogether about 200,000 species of insect pollinators. There are also bird pollinators. Collectively, there are about 1,000 species of vertebrate pollinators. So all around the world, Hawaiian honeycreepers from Hawaii, hummingbirds from the New World, sunbirds from the Old World, honey eaters, brush-tongued lorikeets from down under, and there are even mammal pollinators. Bats are famously pollinators, and there are honey possums. Madagascar, even lemurs are pollinators. There's even a couple of lizard pollinators, not a lot. So altogether, about 1,500 species of vertebrates. So How can you engage the kids? Well, you can play a variation on that kids game headbands, grown-up version, sometimes called Indian poker, where you put up a card and you have to guess what card you have by asking questions about it. Same thing here, but you use insects. So each player gets a facts about pollinator cards, a pollinator name tag's worn on the back so they don't see it, and then you guess what the name tag is or what's on your headband by asking other players. Am I fuzzy? Do I have a long tongue? Do I have 4 wings or 2 wings? Do I have a flat part? So you get to learn all the attributes. Am I warm-blooded, cold-blooded? So here are the facts that you can use. And this game, again, is from one of the many websites. All right, what about the other core ideas? Plants depend on animals for pollination, developing possible solutions. All right, well, how do plants depend on pollination? You need a parts list for the plants as well. So you need the filament in the anther, the stamen is the male part, the stigma is the female part. So pollen from here has to get to here, preferably on a different plants to promote cross-fertilization. Okay, that's the basics. But real flowers can be delicate and difficult to see. You can buy anatomically correct flowers at Walmart for $1/4, particularly after Memorial Day, which is what I do. And teach floral anatomy, and they're robust. You can use them year after year, and for the most part, anatomically correct. You can use them to explain nectar is a good reward. It's mostly sugar, so it tastes sweet. It has vitamins. It has universal appeal, vertebrates and invertebrates. Pollen is another food reward, but it's harder to eat. It's surrounded by a very hard shell. How do pollinators carry pollen from anthers to stigma? So pollen is food. I didn't mean to. It's high in fat, high in protein, hard to chew, hard to digest. Okay, so how do you convey this idea of how going after one reward, the nectar, leaves you carrying off pollen? This is an exercise that's from the North American Pollinator Protection Campaign, where you make a little pipe cleaner pollinator, stick it in a cup, put on sticky tape, and then put in a colored powder. My preference, though, how is a honeybee like a man eating a jelly donut covered with powdered sugar? So how is a man like a bee? Okay. It's impossible to extract the sweet, semi-liquid jelly filling without getting dusted with powdered sugar. Now, I don't know if you could actually do this in a classroom, because some people probably don't want their kids eating jelly donuts, but I think it's a great example of how you can illustrate pollination. So as I was saying, if you want to go beyond bees, just like there's anatomy and morphology associated with different animal taxa, the plants reflect that structure. A bat pollinated plant, flower, open at night or open during the day? You think the flower would be hanging or flat for a landing surface? It hangs because bats can fly. So every type of they're called syndrome. Every syndrome has morphological attributes that reflect the nature of the mechanism by which pollen is carried. So wind-pollinated plants, no color. Nobody needs them because you don't need to attract wind. Butterflies need a landing surface. They can't hover. Hummingbirds can hover, so you can hang your plants down. The whole point, the flowers don't want the wrong pollinators to take their pollen away. So there's co-evolution taking place. All right. So you can take a field trip, and students can make their own observations. What type of flowers are the bees visiting? What type of flowers are the flies visiting? But if you don't have a natural area nearby, you can do your field work on the internet. There are internet resources where this is an explicit lesson, where you can match the pollinator with its particular plant. But you can also do a Google image search. And here, for example, you just type in flowers and hummingbirds, and this is what you get. So take just a quick look. What color are hummingbird pollinated plants? Just quickly, what color? Red. And in fact, that's exactly right. They're red. Are they short stubby flowers, long tubes? What do you think? Just quickly looking, there's kind of a diversity, but you'll see compared to anything else, lots of long tubes. So you just do a Google image search and you can get the gestalt. How about this one? Flowers visited by bats. Nighttime, right? What color? White. Why do you need color if you're trying to attract a bat? It's nighttime. Same sort of thing. Flowers, huge flowers, right? Okay, you can compare butterflies and moths. Again, the difference is clear as night and day, right? So same thing with moths, nighttime, daytime. You get some of the reds, but mostly purples and whites, right? All right, and you know about Bee Spotter. I'm running out of time. But that, again, is a project launched in 2007 as a direct result of this, 2007, as a direct result of the National Academy recommendation to increase citizen science. And the citizen scientists monitor the web portal. We have all these images, great source of data. So if it's the winter and you can't find bees, in nature you can find them on Bee Spotter. We've actually had graduate students who've done parts of projects trying to see if, so Brittany Buckles can tell a male bumblebee from a female bumblebee and use Bee Spotter pictures to see if they rested on different colored flowers. Excuse me. Why care about bees and pollinators? Use the classic spot the difference game. So kids are used to playing this game. So all over the internet, spot the difference. With and without pollinators. What's missing if you don't have pollinators? Here's another version from Whole Foods. Your dairy choices with and without bees. Your produce choices with and without bees. With and without bees. Again, another site. What do you lose when you don't have bees? Activity, plan a bee-free meal. You can give kids allowable and not allowable foods because they're dependent on bee pollinators, animal pollinators in general. And you can see what a challenge it is to put together a healthy meal without pollinators. Same thing, not so healthy meal is hard to put together without pollinators too. Okay, the design plans for conservation. You can have kids brainstorm. Bees are animals. What do animals need? They need food, they need water, they need shelter from the weather, they need protection from their enemies. And what honeybees and bumblebees in particular need? Bee-friendly flowers, a source of water that won't drown them, shelter from weather, honeybees in hives, bumblebees in soil, shelter from enemies in hives and soil, and protection from pesticides. That's one that may not be true for all animals. So many resources online for planting bee-friendly gardens, all kinds. And remember, you can emphasize that bees are active from early spring to late fall, so you have to make sure you have flowers all year long, or all season long. So you can give kids, again, you can make a puzzle out of a garden plan. How do you put together a garden that will have flowers at different times of year? And so just for bees, you can stick to certain colors, but you need that temporal sequence. You can create a deck of cards with seasons as suits, spring, summer, fall, late fall, instead of hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades. And devise games where you have to have a full house or a hand that has all seasons represented. And finally, there are all kinds of resources. The North American Pollinator Protection Campaign has great ideas, great resources, all sort of science tested and science approved. And Bloom Bingo, crossword puzzles, word problems, all kinds of things. You can see the math implications. And Entomological Society of America is working very hard now to provide resources to the K-12 community so that more people can learn about pollinator appreciation. And thank you for appreciating this talk for the last however many minutes. I think we got like 2 minutes for questions or something. I don't know if anybody has to run off, but does anybody have any questions?
Yeah, when I was at NSF, I was involved a little bit with the informal science program.
Uh-huh.
And I gathered Bee Spotter would be in that category.
No, Bee Spotter did not get funded by the informal. I don't know if you remember, but we tried, I think, 3 times to get funding.
Have any studies been done about retention? If you do these things and you come back a year later, how much of this stuff is still part of the kid's life?
I have only anecdotal information, but
Better than knowing.
yeah, but again, I think being in the presence of actual living things has an enormous impact and great retention. Yeah, I don't know that they necessarily remember names and numbers.
A year later, can they still tell you what a bee has to have to be a bee?
That I would be interested in. I can tell you from my undergraduates, though, my non-scientists, we, when the class was smaller, we took field trips to the Pollinatarium, and one was early. You have to wait till it's spring course. You have to wait till the bad weather's over. Now, the thing about honeybees is they're active all year long. They're actually overwintering. They're active. They form an overwintering cluster, but what they don't do is defecate, because then that would foul the hive. So the first nice spring day, they all fly out and relieve themselves and fly back in. Well, we happened to coincide with that nice first spring day, and the kids all had their question sheets, which were spotted with yellow, and the bees were all over, I had to explain to them what the yellow spots were, and I guarantee you they remembered that for the rest of their life. So it all depends on what happens. So. I mean, most people don't even think that, bees poop, right? So, with great abandon on certain days of year. Any other questions?
It seems there's so much there. It could be a theme for a whole year.
Oh, sure. You could work math into this. You can work history into this. You can work vocabulary into this. Yeah. Yeah.
And then it would be remembered if there were if it was sort of repeated again and again.
And then you'd increase the retention. Yeah.
The last time I saw you was in a picture with President Obama when you were getting a medal.
Yeah. That was pretty deluxe. Like still pinching myself.
Yeah. So, did you say something to him about
I did.
Save the Bees?
I did.
Is there an executive order?
Yes, there is.
Oh,
yes.
What is that?
All right, well, let me put this in context. And so on April 30th, I was invited along with about 50 other people to a White House summit in anticipation of what would become an executive order. The summit brought together industry, non-NGOs, educators, beekeepers, all kinds of interested parties. And the point was, what can be done to, collectively help the bees sort of aspirationally. And the general consensus is plant more flowers. And in June, the president issued an executive order that essentially charged all federal agencies with increasing the acreage of pollinator-friendly plantings. And that was that's like something on the order of 11 million acres. And it's the only thing he could do without Congress. It was an executive order. So now all the different agencies are working on plans to increase pollinator-friendly plantings. Transportation, Department of Transportation is having a summit in December. They own millions of acres, highway rights-of-way, which are now sort of meticulously managed and mowed and planted and are useless biological deserts for pollinators. So in one fell swoop, he empowered federal agencies and creates an example for private sector and the educational community and everyone else to follow. So, so the actual conversation, we each got like 5 minutes with the president. So we chatted about various and sundry things. I told him I voted for him more than most people. All legally, because I was from Illinois. Yeah, and but as I was leaving, I said, "Thank you for caring about the bees." And he kind of turned around and said, "I do care about the bees, and we will fix them." And he has done more than any other president. I've checked this. Jefferson kept bees. He wrote about. He actually wrote a treatise on bees. George Washington used honey on his hoe cakes. But he is by far the most bee-friendly president, and that is, apologies to President Obama, change you can believe in, right?
Question I can ask afterward. I was at the Farm Progress show last month, and Bayer had a display at the main entrance with flowers.
Yeah. Oh.
Bees.
They've gotten they make the neonicotinoids, most of them neonic, and they've been a target all kinds of criticism, but Bayer, Syngenta, a lot of the pesticide companies are very keen to do what they can to sort of ameliorate the risks posed by pesticides. Does not endear them to a segment of the population that, and frankly, we are really, I mean, the most telling study in the past, well, since 2007, 2010, a group from Penn State used very sensitive chemical equipment to detect residues. They found 121 different pesticides and metabolites inside beehives, an average number of detections, six per sample, with a high of 39. There were, every class of pesticide could be found in a beehive, not just insecticides, but fungicides, herbicides, every kind of every class of insecticide, and the acaricides, the mite-killing compounds that beekeepers introduce into the hive to control the parasitic varroa mite, which is causing massive mortality in honeybees. 98% of the wax samples from hives around the country were contaminated with the acaricides the beekeepers put in the wax because they recycle the wax. So yeah, we're really using too many chemicals. So
Are you optimistic?
I am very optimistic because 10 years ago, every call I got about bees was, I got bees in my yard, how do I kill them? And now people are, I got bees in my yard, do you want them? Or how do I save them without hurting them? What can I do to keep them there? It's been a complete sea change.
When do you think the trajectory will start going back up on the populations?
Well, to some degree, honeybees are an anomaly because they are a managed species. It's like chickens versus robins, you know. They are managed by people. So beekeepers, you know, sell their services. You can get $150 per hive in almonds for pollination services, worth more than honey. So they can split hives, raise, make two out of one. And there are very few feral bees anymore, sort of wild bees, because varroa mites and diseases have killed them all. But the ones that are, like the bumblebees and bee spotter, nobody's managing those. So to some degree, if everyone is planting more flowers and more conscious of the problem, then I'm very optimistic.
Do you think that this business of dragging them around the country like gypsies is a good idea?
Well, they're amazingly resilient. I mean, I just went to a meeting in California and then flew to DC and then came home, and I'm still getting up at 4 in the morning, and I don't know why, but they seem to adjust with remarkable ease. But that said, half of America's bees, 1.25 million colonies, get transported to almonds in a 2-week period. Can't grow almonds, which is like 900,000 acres now in California, in like a $3 billion crop. You cannot grow them without bees. There's no other pollinator that has that kind of workforce. And the big problem is, just like fall at University of Illinois, when kids come from all over the country and bring their pathogens to one place, remember our mumps outbreak? That's what happens. It's not so much the transport, but the mixing from all over the country of every conceivable disease. There are at least probably 12.5 viruses that infect bees, and they all come together in California.
Kind of the globalization of insects.
Well, that's a different thing, because some people think that colony collapse disorder, this phenomenon, originated when beekeepers and almond growers lobbied Congress to lift the Honeybee Act of 1922, one of the few significant pieces of legislation passed during the Harding administration. I told you I did the history of presidents and bees. And which prevented the importation of any adult bees from, any bees, period, from elsewhere in the world, to protect our bees from disease. Well, there was such a need, we couldn't meet the need for pollination, so the California lobbyists convinced Congress to lift the ban. We imported bees from Australia, first time, ever, and then a year later we had colony collapse disorder. So nobody exactly knows. It was probably not a good idea to import bees. There's a big issue now with importing bumblebees. Even, this is a whole different lecture, so I won't. Did you have a question?
Maybe other pollinators are more that, so the trend in farming in the last 10 to 20 years, as a kid, I could go out in the ditches.
Yeah,
you
there are
know,
no
see
ditches
that-
anymore.
Yeah, there are no ditches anymore, so there's, you know, I mean, when you multiply that times all the ditches in the world, I'm assuming that particularly affects some pollinators and some pollinating.
Well, one of the recommendations we had was to bolster the conservation reserve programs. So growers, farmers get reimbursed for planting land in conservation, but they weren't getting any help with what to plant. You plant grasses, you're not helping pollinators. So one of the recommendations was provide them with lists. And then,
Change it from not just cover crops.
then ethanol happened. And the conservation reserve program return on investment was dwarfed by growers expanding corn production into even marginal land because there was such a high artificially inflated price. So Illinois has lost thousands of acres that had been in conservation. So it's economics. It's so complicated. I know on one hand it's also very easy. You know, you want bees, plant flowers.
Well, and some of it, even before the prices, I think it was, you know, being able to, you know, flatten out the ditches.
Yeah.
I mean,
Well, I
big
came from-
machinery trying to get through the
Yeah,
ditches.
I came from central New York, and I was used to ditches and stone, or, you know, New England stone fences, and I came here and they're not even fences, because that would get in the way of the combines moving across. I'd never seen anything like this. Yeah, so Illinois is kind of one end of a spectrum.
Indiana even more than Illinois.
Yeah, maybe the hills fool you a little bit, but yeah, so it's a mindset, and you know, again, a big problem, and this is a whole different lecture. Growers tend to depend on systemic insecticides, which is a horrible idea that's antithetical to 50 years of integrated pest management. Because same reason you don't prescribe antibiotics every time you have a sore throat, you shouldn't incorporate into every individual plant a pesticide in every part of the plant if you don't even know you're going to have an insect problem. The advantage is it's already there. You don't have to do crop scouting. You don't have to. It's there, but it's not real insurance. It's basically selection for resistance and greatly increasing the environmental contamination. But that's because of prices. You can afford a little insurance, so it's not really insurance, but it's all it's all economic. I've been on all these science committees, and it's always the most important guy in the room. I mean, in a generic sense. And I never realized I was on these committees. It's the economist. Because you can propose science-based solutions till, you know, the cows come home, to use an agricultural metaphor. But if they're not economically viable, then you're wasting your time. So I have learned to listen with great respect to economists. And on that note, all right, thank you, everybody.
So
Oh.
much.
Well,